Good morning, Frankfurt. I'm Amanda Cook, member of Frankfurt VFW Post 1493. On behalf of the Post, welcome to our Memorial Day ceremony. We are pleased to announce our esteemed guests, who include Deputy State's Attorney Ken Gray, our Mayor Keith Ogle, and the Hickory Creek Middle School Symphonic Band under the direction of Doug Adams, Ellison Bowman, and Shannon Shanahan. We offer a sincere thank you to you, the residents, who help us honor the fallen each year on this somber day. On Memorial Day, we take the day to remember those who served with honor, and we have gathered here in tribute to those who made the ultimate sacrifice while serving in the armed forces, to whom we owe the deepest gratitude. Our ceremony will begin with a prayer from our post chaplain, Robert Easton.
Thank you, Amanda. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on this day of remembrance. Let's remember that they may be gone, but they're never forgotten. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, on this solemn day we gather in gratitude and reverence, remembering the men and women who gave their lives in service to our country and in defense of freedom. Their courage, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion stand as a testament to the highest ideals of love and duty. We lift up to you the families who bear the deep ache of loss. Wrap them in your tender mercy and grant them the peace that surpasses understanding. May they find comfort in knowing their loved one's service has left a legacy that will never fade. As a nation, help us to honor the memory of the following, not only with words, but with lives that reflect the values they fought to preserve: justice, compassion, unity, and peace. Teach us to cherish the freedoms we enjoy and to use them for the good of all. On this Memorial Day, may our hearts be stirred to live with greater purpose, to love more deeply, to serve more faithfully. Let the light of their sacrifice guide us toward a future where peace reigns and no life is lost to war. Amen.
Thank you. I want to turn your attention to our post commander, Al Gutierrez, as he lowers the flag to half-mast as a sign of respect for those who have passed. Each year, we place a wreath below the flag on our memorial to the armed services, also in remembrance of those veterans who have passed. This year, the wreath is presented by Vicki Gress of the VFW Ladies Auxiliary. Thank you for all you do for our veterans and for memorializing the fallen with us today. We will now hear the Star Spangled Banner performed by the Hickory Creek Middle School Symphonic Band. Our mayor has prepared a special address for our community today.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today here in Frankfurt as we gather to observe Memorial Day. Memorial Day is one of the solemn days of our national calendar. It's not simply the unofficial beginning of summer, nor merely a weekend with family and friends. It is a day set aside for remembrance, a day to honor the brave men and women of our armed forces who gave their lives in service to the United States of America. Today we pause as a community to remember those who never made it home. We remember the young men who stormed the beaches of Normandy, the soldiers who fought through the bitter cold in Korea, the service members who endured the jungles of Vietnam, the deserts of the Middle East, and the countless conflicts around the globe in defense of liberty. We also remember those whose names are known only to their families, friends, and hometowns. Ordinary Americans who answered an extraordinary call to serve. This year's ceremony carries additional meaning as our nation prepares to commemorate America 250, the 250th anniversary of the signing of Declaration of Independence in 1776. For nearly 2.5 centuries, generations of Americans have stepped forward to defend the ideals first written into that remarkable document: liberty, equality, self-government, and the belief that freedom is worth protecting. Those ideals have endured not because they were guaranteed, but because Americans throughout our history have been willing to sacrifice for them. As we approach this historic milestone, Memorial Day reminds us that the story of America has always been written and carried forward by individuals willing to place service above self. The freedoms we enjoy today, the right to speak freely, worship freely, gather freely, and govern ourselves, have come at an extraordinary cost. They were preserved by citizens who wore the uniform of our nation, who understood that freedom required courage, duty, and sacrifice. In communities like Frankfort, we continue to see the values that strengthen this country: patriotism, service, kindness, and respect for one another. Memorial Day gives us the opportunity to not only honor those we lost, but also to recommit ourselves to being worthy of their sacrifice. I would like to extend my sincere thanks to our Frankfort VFW Post for their continued dedication to preserving the meaning and traditions of Memorial Day here in our community. Your commitment ensures that future generations understand the importance of remembering those who gave everything for our nation. I'd also like to thank the Hickory Creek Middle School Symphonic Band and their directors for sharing their talents today. Thank you as well to Police Chief Leanne Chalepis and the Frankfort Fire Department, or the Police Department, our Fire Chief Paul Kinsella, and the Frankfort Fire Protection District, our veterans, our organizations, elected officials, volunteers, and everyone who helped make today's ceremony possible. I see Trustee Rigoni is here today from our Frankfort Village Board, as well as our former Mayor, Jim Holland, with us today. And most importantly, to the families of our fallen heroes, we remember your loved ones. We honor their sacrifices, and we thank you for sharing them with our nation. As we leave here today and continue our Memorial Day observances, may we carry with us a renewed appreciation for the freedoms we often take for granted and a deeper understanding of the price that has been paid to preserve them. May we never forget those who have made the ultimate sacrifice for this country. May God bless our veterans, our active duty services members, in the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Ogle. The Honorable Ken Gray, Chief Deputy State's Attorney, will read the names of deceased veterans from Frankfort buried at Abraham Lincoln, Pleasant Hill, Rose Hill, Skyline Cemeteries, and elsewhere.
Good morning. It's a beautiful day today, isn't it? Great day to remember a lot of things. But Amanda, thank you so much. And thank you for all of our members of the VFW here, as well as the police and so on. Mayor Ogle, thank you so much for your inspiring comments. But they're very, very, very good. Thank you all for being here. Family and friends of names who will be read, veterans who have passed on, and some who have died for our country, some who have been disabled, some who have suffered traumatic emotional distress. Thank you. Thank you for being here for them. I also want to thank Amanda Cook, Steve Sigler, Phyllis Stigler, and many others who have kept us advised as to the compilation and updating of our roll over these many years. I also want to thank VFW Post 1493 for all that they have done for our country and our community and for the devoted military service. Gentlemen, thank you. I said remembrance before, for it is a day to remember all those who have served our wonderful country. It is a day to remember to be so thankful for those who have served in our military and, as I said, who were injured both physically and emotionally in our country's fight for continuing freedom and liberty, and to especially remember those who paid the ultimate price for those same principles. It has often been said that freedom is not free. Indeed. The selfless act of serving one's country is a noble pursuit, and we are forever grateful for those who are willing to give it their all, even if it means laying down their own life for our freedoms. I am honored and humbled to carry on this great tradition of reading the roll of those who have served in our branches of the military and have passed on. The reading of the roll began with Mayor George Sangmeister, who served as mayor of Frankfort from 1935 to 1965. The reading was next carried on by his son, former Congressman George Sangmeister, who was one of my mentors as a young man, and later became a law partner of mine. We worked right out of that building right over there before it was taken down, a new one, beautiful new one constructed. Congressman Sangmeister was the moving member of Congress who established the Abraham Lincoln National Cemetery and is buried in its hallowed ground. Upon its official opening in 1999, Congressman Sangmeister's presence was requested for the Memorial Day services at Abraham Lincoln, wherein George asked me to begin reading the roll. It has been my honor and I'm humbled. And just as a note, if there's anyone who's aware of a name that should be included on our list, a veteran from our area here, who's passed away, we'd like to be told about that so he can be added to the list of veterans of our area. And you can contact the VFW, the village happily takes care of that as well, Amanda Cook, or myself. The reading of the roll. These are the names of those who have served our country with honor and distinction and are laid to rest at Abraham Lincoln. Wendell Anderson, Thomas M. Allen, Paul F. Arrivo, Ronald William K. Atkinson, Steve Baggs, Neil M. Baker, Janet Bates, Michael Allen Beebe, David Lee Benson, John H. Benson, Albert O. Bashansky, Brian J. Bilecki, Sonny Blackburn, George E. Blas, William G. Blocker, Albert M. Bodine, Wayne Bracken, Leonard J. Brainer, Glenn A. Bruce, Gary P. Cheatham, James Clark, Thomas A. Cole, George J. Coles, Clark Cookingham, Robert L. Krishy, Louis Chakowski, Bob L. Dalton, Marty G. Jellisman, Richard A. DeWolf, Gilbert DeRazio, John E. Dunham, Reggie Ellisons, Tim Engstrom, D.C. Epperson, Joseph G. Every, John E. Fedak Jr., Daniel J. Filipiak, David H. Finnegan, Herschel J. Floyd, Charles Foote, Francis X. Gayon, Robert W. Garrett, Edward J. Geisler Jr., John A. Glaubke, Joseph W. Graff, Tara D. Graveline, Frank Oliver Gray Jr., William D. Griffith Sr., Leonard A. Ham, Chester E. Hankoski, John J. Hanson, Raymond A. Hans, Calvert E. Heath Jr., Joseph G. Hubbard Sr., Vincent L. Herman, Robert A. Herrick, Leonardus H. Hain, Gerald W. Howard, Patrick C. Jesse, Clarence Jones, Patrick H. Jordan, Kenneth W. Kaiser, Robert Arthur Campy, Eugene Kemeg, Carl W. Coling Jr., Charles E. Condis, William H. Krosky, John L. Kuhnhart, James G. Lally, Joseph A. Lentise, John Lindemulder, Thomas P. Makowski, Robert L. Mansell, Charles P. Margeron, Anthony Marine Jr., Thomas P. Martin, Richard M. Matlaws, Lyle MacArthur, W. Stevens McCarthy, Robert T. McGill, Edward I. Melby, Donald R. Melcher, John Murch, Rusty Meyer, George R. Mistro, William J. Mix, Martin J. Mobeck, Robert H. Moore, Larry Morgan, Hans D. Mosh, George D. Moyle, James R. Murray Sr., Raymond J. Miskovitz, James L. O'Brien, Michael Ray O'Brien, Howard L. Pample, Kello Panici, Hendrik E. Partee, Frank Picetto, Bobby L. Petrella, Michael J. Pisturzi, Bruce R. Pletch, Ralph G. Port, Ronald J. Porter, Mel G. Provencher, Thomas A. Putman, Philip J. Raven, Ronald C. Reed, Frank Renz, Morgan W. Roderick, Richard S. Roscoe, Thomas L. Sandin, George E. Sangmeister, John W. Scanlon, Donald L. Schofield, Ronald A. Senesac, James H. Sexton, Dale L. Sherwin, George W. Schultz, Leroy A. Skinkus, Richard Skopik, Gary Smith, Vincent A. Sola, Stephen J. Solava, Chester Sotis, Colin E. Sorensen, Gerald C. Squirroot, Tom Stack, John R. Stack, Cyril Strezzo, Antonio Sutera, John Valenti, Richard C. Wagner, Paul Wessel Jr., Emmanuel S. White, Thomas J. Jacobosi Jr., Walter G. Rizbicki, Ronald Zolkowski. These are the veterans laid to rest at Frankfort Cemetery. Frank Abbott, George Bussey, Donald Carroll, Andrew Eisenbrandt, Eugene Eisenbrandt, Melvin Eisenbrandt, Richard G. Folletti, Harry E. Gibson, Ted Gibson, Clifford Griswold, Walter Hawkinson, Glenn G. Jacobs, Joseph Mashkin, Dalton Miller, David William Nelson, Frank G. Reitz, Edward Stippen, Harold J. Wingler, Joseph W. Zimmerman. These are the veterans laid to rest at Pleasant Hill Cemetery. Nick Aducci, Irby J. Albright, Nick Altavilla, Jimmy John Altavilla, Stephen Amir, Alma Bailey, John Bailey, Anthony Ballencount, Julius A. Barnes, Richard Barnes, Kenneth Baumberg, Norman W. Baumgartner, Victor K. Beckman, Louis Belcher, Edward H. Bells, Clark W. Bennett, Robert R. Bennett, Raymond Bettenhausen, John N. Benetti, Cyril Blackwell, Thomas Blaney, Kenneth Bloomer, Stanley Bobson, Henry P. Bach, Jerry C. Bach, Donald Betcher, Arthur Bogaz, Kenneth Boonstra, Sam Brenlinger, Norman Bride, Joseph Belzira, Edward Bukowinski, Ruth Burns, Leonard R. Busen, John Caldwell, Evelyn Canterbury, Ray Canterbury, Carl Cardinal, Lenore Cardinal, Donald Carlson, Kenneth Carlson, Matt Carson, Horace N. Cachetta, James Chambers, Stephen Chambers, Walter J. Cheney, Lloyd Cleveland, William Cleveland, Kenneth Cohn, Terry L. Coisart, Robert Crutchfield, Thomas A. Curran, Chester Donata, Anna P. Dayon, William J. Dayon, William Dangel, Albert L. Diefenbach, Russell Leon Davis, Donald DeHart, Jacob DePorto, Henry D'Arcole, George Durcabito, Cornelius DeWitt, Gordon K. Dillon, Klaus B. Ditchler, William Dugan, Ambrose Doty, Robert P. Desden, Ralph Drowley, Bruce Ebert, Chester Ebert, Edmund Ebert, Jack L. Edmondson, John C. Ellis, George Robert Elsner, Eric H. Erickson, Azel Erickson, Robert D. Evans, Michael Falachek, Joseph Ficker, Herbert P. Folkers, Herbert Folkers Jr., Johnson Folkers, Dale Fordyce, Ronald G. Fox, Ronald J. Fredericks, Robert Fredine, Robert Frey, Leonard Fries, Aaron Fritz, Robert E. Fritz, Fred Fulsang, Robert M. Gaba, Udell W. Gay, Delmar Janens, Donald Janens, Harry Janens, William Janens, Earl Gearman, Sam Giordano, John W. Glisson, James M. Grady, Donald R. Graves, Alvin Gullickson, William Guzika, Conrad Hawkinson, Emil T. Haas, Sam Hageman, Richard Hansen Jr., Henry Harnack, Ronald W. Harnack, Roland Hatcher, Bernard J. Hauser, Joseph Hubbard, William Hecht, Charles Hagan, Melvin A. Hine, Clarence Heisner, Roy M. Hensley Jr., Raymond Hernandez, Ralph Leonard Hitz, Charles Hornback, Walter Horton, Harry Hodgkin, Robert D.L. Hull, John Henry Yeager, Leonard Japp Jr., Leroy Yarkow, Gary Johansson, George H. Johnson, Kenneth Johnson, Olaf A. Johnson, Roy Johnson, Joseph B. Jolly, John Keller, Frank Kerr, Joseph Kerwin, Warren W. Peake, Dennis Kimsey, Rupert Kinnery, Thomas Kinnery, Orville Knierim, William Knipple, Robert Kohler, Stanley Kostecki, John Kotas, Frank Kovar, Leslie Kraft, Erwin A. Kruger, Richard J. Krenicki, John Kuzi, Albert M. Blaue, James Albert Larimore, George Leffler, John Leffler, Wendell M. Leffler, Frank Ligero, Frank E. Ligero, Maynard W. Lugert, Glenn Lewis, Troy Lyerly, Klaus Peter Lichtenfeld, Bruno Liniento, James Edward Logan, George Ludoff, Lloyd P. Luring, Edgar Lund, Robert O. Lundquist, John Maddox, Andrew J. Melito, James McCarthy, James McDermott, Charles McMiniman, Francis J. McNally, Thomas Myers, George Martin Mickelson, Michael Micus, Robert W. P. Mitchell, John C. Moulter, John Montella, Henry J. Montel, Louis Marino, Ralph E. Morrison, Charles L. Moscott, Fred Muff, James Munch, Jack Munger, Douglas A. Mervine, Wilfred Niedringhaus, Robert Newgren, Ralph Neelan, Ronald H. Nevada, Donald H. Oliveri, Charles Olson, Philip J. Ortigal, William Osman, David Parks, Charles L. Pasca, James A. Patterson, Leonard Peterson Jr., Herbert E. Phillips, Clarence Pieper, Emmerich J. Pillar, Marion J. Pamakawa, Wayne Price, James Pyle, Clarence J. Radke, Russell Ragsdell, Robert Raka, Albert Redmond, Fred Reimers, William Reimers, Jack A. Rinaldi, Daniel Rarica, Robert Reynolds, James Rice, Ronald Rimkus, David Roberts, William Robinson, Earl Rousseau, Eris Rudman, Dr. Irving Rudman, William J. Rung, Frank R. Saletta, Brent Sanders, Darrell Sanders, Julius J. Sandy, Paul Scaletta, James J. Scanlon, Richard T. Shedicke, Rodney Schaefer, Herbert J. Shoup, Alan Schramm, Norbert Schroeder, George Schultz, Earl Scott, Delbert F. Seaman, Percy Severson, Forrest Shaw, Clarence Ciano Jr., Raleigh V. Sinks, Woodrow Simmons, Frank F. Sinnott, Scott C. Skoglund, William Thompson, Frank J. Scalish, Darrell Smith, Dr. Laverne Smith, Raymond Smith, Ronald H. Smith, William Smith, Eric Spengler, Tom Stack, Robert L. Stanek, Stanley Staton, Arnold J. Steves, Chester Stefanik, Roy Stellwagen, James R. Stern, Meade Stuckey, Richard Saranovic, Fred Soria, Donald Swanberg, George R. Swanberg, Matt Szymanski, Joseph Telesferi, Antonio Tortorici, Bruno F. Trento, Richard Trevarthen, Martin Tuck, Alexander Melvin Turner, Sylvester Tyler, Arthur Van Cura, Willard Van Eck, Henry Van Winkle, Thomas Vogler, Edward Vollrath, Lambert Vollrath, John Wagner, Curtis L. Waldvogel, William Walker, Jeremiah Wall, James Warren, Charles Weber, Cheryl Whiteroad, Fred B. Wietendorf, Andrea Wershing, Lillian White, Everett Whitmore, Charles Wingler, John L. Wiat, Henry V. Wood, Joseph Zamodik, Paul Zenzina. These are the veterans laid to rest at Rose Hill Cemetery. Edwin Brandow, George Brandow, Lloyd W. Brandow, Ronald O. Elwell, Russell J. Elwell, George Heisner, Arthur Conrad Mark Jr., Frank Mark, Walter Mark, Henry Ross, Jacob Ross. These are the veterans laid to rest at Skyline Cemetery. Gerald Abbey, Arthur E. Anderson, Alexander A. Antusis, Melvin Bartels, Eugene Batson, William Batson, Melvin Bernardi, James A. Bernero, William Blau, Edward Brown, Leland Dalton, John P. DeVos, Glenn E. Farrell, Herbert B. Hardy, Clarence Harms, Milton W. Harms, Edward L. Hartley, Irvin Holm, Frederick Holzoffel Sr., Henry Hosbach, Frederick H. Peak, Leroy Cluth, George Martin, Donald C. Myers, Harry E. Miller, Ernest J. Novilli, Glenn Nissen, Oliver F. Pass, Fred K. Paxton, James A. Rafoff, Frank Sartori, Harold Ellsworth Schiffler, Gottfried Schinkowski, Orville Schinkowski, Howard J. Seaman, William D. Shanafelt, George F. Schaus, Donald E. Stephen, John Joseph Tyler, Casimir M. Wojcik, Vincent N. Zeranti, Andrew Zink. These are the veterans laid to rest at Twinning Cemetery. Andrew Barge, Howard W. Duke, Uriah Hardy, Andrew T. Holm, Edwil A. Rabb. These are the veterans laid to rest elsewhere. Jerome K. Ackert, Donald H. Eggleston, Leland B. Alderson, Fermi A. Alderson, John Alfano, Rudolph Y. Allegrucci, Kenneth A. Allen, Thomas M. Allen, Gus Anagnos, Herman S. Anderson, Nels Anderson, Robert L. Anderson, William J. Andresiak, John P. Angelis, James R. Angio, Timothy J. Arman, Clarence H. Bach, Richard Bacino, Al Baggs, Gregory Ballett, James Ballett, Norbert Ballett, Harold Baldacci, Melvin A. Bartels, Robert T. Baxter, Hugo Becker, Chester Bellevin, Joseph A. Bella, Ernest H. Bennett, David Lee Benson, Catherine L. Berkery, Batista Bertoletti, Robert C. Besson, William L. Blakemore, John C. Blancett Sr., Norton Blaylock, Richard J. Bach, Warren Harold Bach, Edward J. Badon, Jack Bone, Thomas F. Boland, Harold A. Borman, Eugene Brackman, William S. Bradford, Paul Brandow, Marvin F. Bremer, Leo B. Brennan, Melvin R. Brink, Henry C. Brinkmeyer, Richard D. Bruno, August O. Butcher, Alice M. Buddy, Phil Bundy, Angelo J. Caliendo, William Thomas Campbell, Don V. Cap, John F. Caparelli, Paul M. Carlson, John G. Cernauskas, Paul Chamberlain, Jack D. Chiappetta, John E. Corley, Patrick F. Connolly, Cornelius J. Cook, Jack Cook, Noah W. Crane, Frederick Cross, Edward E. Crowder, Joseph P. Cryon, James P. Cummings, Joseph B. Currier, Alan J. Curry, Lawrence Chaswitz Sr., James N. Daly, Albert L. Diefenbach, Frank E. David, George E. Davies, Geno DeRay, James J. Delaney, William V. DeLauder, David P. Detmer, Neil O. DeVore Sr., Frederick H. Dinger, Dominic A. Tuliano, Thomas H. Donovan, Russell A. Dubrawa, Stanley Charles Douglas, Francis Doyle, John Dorsch, John A. Duncan, John DeRocker, William F. Earhart III, Gene R. Ellis, Thomas Edward Ellis, Alan P. Engelhart, Harry L. Engeldow, Robert J. Erdy, Andrew M. Evans, Walter S. Farron, Lee W. Filippo, David H. Finnegan, Nicholas Fisher, Herman Fleischem, Henry Flenchy, Frank Folisi, Thomas J. Frangella, Herman L. Frank, James Freeman, William A. Friedel, Gaetano Kenneth Foucault, James Robert Garofalo, Warren H. Garrett, Anthony S. Gasbero, Frank Robert Gemato, Dale Janens, Eugene J. Girardi Sr., Ricardo A. Girardi, Harry M. Gerkitz, John G. Jernauskas, Ted Gerndt, Frederick J. Glatz, Edward Golden, John Golden, Trevor Golden, Sebastian Gonlag, Carl G. Gren, Leonard B. Gromnicki, Edward Gross, Leo H. Grzuski, George A. Haddad, Lord R. Hall, William J. Halperin, James W. Hanna, William C. Hardy, Ernest A. Hargison, Raymond Harms, Daniel P. Hatton, Charles E. Hecht, Calvin A. Hine, Lawrence Hobson, Lester R. Hochfolter, John Hogan, Lawrence Hogan, Leo Thomas Hogan, William R. Holfilson, Leon Holman, Edward Hooton, James J. Horvath, Robert W. Hrara, Dean Paul Hulhorst Sr., Lawrence A. Estelle, Margaret Estelle, John S. Ivers, Robert John, Michael J. Jamrock, Ignatius J. Janusik, William R. Jensen, Albert Johnson, James W. Johnson, John W. Johnson, Walter J. Johnson, Roy Jones, Norman W. Judes, Richard Kazmarski, Wayne Karstensen, Edward J. Kazarskis Sr., Herman G. Kautz, Ronald J. Keene, Herman J. Kaiser, James C. Keeler, Richard Keller, Thomas Kellerman, James J. Kelly, Thomas K. Kennard, Edward R. Kewandowski, John King, Richard Klotz, Leroy Marvin Cluth, Barney F. Kamak, Eugene Kamek, Orville Knierim, Joseph G. Kordick, Jerry E. Kovar, Stanley J. Kozasik, Joseph R. Crow, Stanley Kresmer, Harold G. Crone, Robert W. Cross, Stephen F. Kubek, Andrew Kubrick, Robert A. Koo, Dennis J. Kuta, Howard George Larson, Roy Larson, William R. Lawrence, Lester L. Lair, Dominic Leonardo, William Lester, Gerald E. Lichtenwalter, Carl Lindy, David Lindstrom, Raymond E. Lorden, John P. Luskus, Walter Frank Madsen, Marvin A. Mager, Michael Mahaney, Donald W. Maher, Richard A. Mango, Gerald W. Mark, Peter A. Markunis, Louis P. Masidi Jr., Samuel Matthews III, James C. McCarthy, James McCauley, Billy G. McClard, Robert McCann, John Otis McCleary, Frank C. McClenahan, James D. McElroy, John R. McKendry, James McElroy, Joseph Madrano, Robert Mears, Gerlando Malai, Louis D. Menahan, Robert Mensing, George E. Merica, James Marion, Gerald Messick, Tom L. Metz, Joseph Metzger, Michael Mikas, Robert Mills Sr., Robert Bobby Mills Jr., Paul Mizovitz Jr., Russell Morgan, Warren Mankey, Bernard L. Mandela, Gerald R. Mankowski, Charles P. Margeron, Lawrence Marquardt, Robert Martinson, Wayne Massey, Ira Maynard, Ralph C. Matuziak, Michael L. McCoos, Mark Modrigan Jr., Frank Mondry, Henry J. Matwell, James Moy, Hans W. Muller, Arthur C. Mullen Jr., Bruce A. Mullen, Vito Mirabito, Robert E. Murphy, John Leo Nowraki, Joseph Nichols, Nicholas J. Nidzikowski, Everett H. Nissen, John Nordzel, Ben Novelli Jr., Edward Oakley, Lawrence E. Oglesby, Morris Okerlund, Henry J. Oliveri Sr., Robert E. O'Neill, Robert J. O'Meara, Theodore Osich, Paul Oswald, Douglas Osborne, Lawrence A. Paha, Joseph J. Polesny, Rudolph Piloto, Raymond Carl Perello, Mario J. Pascarella, Philip Pascarella, George F. Pasquier, Rudolph Pavlaka, Leonard Pearson, Leonard H. Pechtold, Casimir Pekulis, Bruce R. Pedrum Sr., William Peters, John A. Peterson, David R. Phillips, Charles Pizanka, Angelo Pisturzi, Frank A. Plesser, Edward J. Polito, Edward F. Purser, Scott B. Price, James H. Prince Sr., Henry F. Prokosky, Francis B. Pugliese, Joseph Pugliese, Louis A. Rabelhofer, William Rankin Sr., Charles A. Reddy, Paul M. Rebus, Ronald C. Reed, John P. Reedy, Irvin H. Reimer, Alex A. Rembus, Catherine M. Reynolds, Frederick M. Reister, Lee R. Rinker, Walter Ritt, Manuel C. Rod, Daniel J. Romer, Patrick Rogers, William M. Rogue, Donald S. Rosolowski, John E. Rossi, Rivaldo T. Rossini, Robert Roth, Dominic Rotondo Jr., Louis Stanley Rudnicki, Pompeo Rigeri, Ronald Rebecca, Don Sabatino, Robert S. Sadak, Charles F. Samek, Albert L. Saviano, Matt Sako, Rodney Schaefer, John J. Schillen, Joe Schmidt, Alfred Schrank, Roy J. Shute, George R. Schultz, David A. Schunk, Harold Schwab, Frank Stanley Sedlar, John Selheimer, William I. Shanafelt, Thomas C. Shannon, Walter J. Shatkus, Albert R. Shaw, Francis G. Sheridan, Charlie Shields, Jim Shields, Ralph J. Snow, Paul R. Schultz, George Shutak, George D. Shutak, Frederick A. Siekman, Eric P. Simmons, Gordon E. Slade, Walter J. Smielek Jr., Charles R. Smith, Dudley H. Smith, Paul J. Sosnowski, Sylvester S. Sosnowski, Joseph Sotosanto, Roger W. Southard, Ronald J. Spezia, Daniel R. Spur Jr., Stade, Michael R. Stanich, Ivan Stanquist, Lawrence John Stasatis, William Staton, Gerald Stillman, Roderick W. Story, Clarence Stunkel, Leonard Stunkel, William Stunkel, Benedict H. Storacco, Thomas Strata, Ronald R. Stromberg, Melvin Stutzbriem, Larry Schubert, Bernard Sundberg, Robert Sweeten, Donald Swinford, Albert R. Sylvester, Joseph J. Zarmak, John Edward Taylor, Michael M. Thompson, Art Thompson Jr., William R. Telemary, Philip Telleth, R. Harold Trezise Sr., Albert C. Trevel Jr., Henry A. Tumbarello, Stanley A. Tylinski, Lawrence L. Unger, Dominic Venuso, Joe A. Villarreal, Matt Voludis, William Wace, Andrew Walchek, William J. Walker, Fred A. Wallerstedt, William M. Walsh, Ralph D. Ward, Clement W. Warner, Robert Warren, James Weingartner, John T. Welling, Howard Werner, Walter Werner, Charles Wirt, Emil Willie, Howard Willis, Anthony C. Williams, Matthew David Williams, Wayne F. Worth, Lester E. Lusky, Ronald W. Yates, Van Earl Yunker, Theodore J. Zane, Lowell F. Zimmerman. That concludes the reading of the roll. May God bless them, their families, and continue to bless this great country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ken, for honoring Frankfurt's veterans each year in this way. You always do an excellent job with this important remembrance. The Frankfurt VFW's Rifle Squad will now present a 21-gun salute to the fallen, followed by taps played by student Aiden Edwards. Please be ready for it to be loud. Participation in this important tradition means a lot to us and to their families. Please enjoy the rest of your holiday, and thanks again for attending.